We keep on trying to find new economic ways to perhaps better our salary. So we'll try to talk to you about that petrol price, which does go down later today. But for now, Presidential Economic Advisor Trudy Makhaya has noted with concern the fact that investment seems to be centered in one place. She said this negatively impacts the country's development outcome. Now, Makhaya was speaking at the Impact Investment Forum, which is taking place ahead of the investment conference. For more, we do cross to our reporter Mbalenhle Mthethwa, who is, of course, in Sandton. Good afternoon to you, Mbalenhle. The sentiments out of Trudy Makhaya are certainly around investment being centered only in one place, hindering South Africa's developmental path. Is that necessarily bad, or is that perhaps something that they're trying to mitigate against and deal with now?
Good afternoon, Arabile. It's definitely something that they are trying to work to try and fix in the future. We understand that the government, President Ramaphosa is in the process of trying to get as much investment into the country. He's on a drive to attract around over 1 trillion billion rands into the economy. And she was basically talking about how because investments have been concentrated in the big cities, people in rural areas have not had access to economic opportunities, which is what has resulted in the big urban migration that we've seen over the years. She's also spoken about how this should assist South Africa to rebuild its economy and start growing the economy all over again. She spoke about the importance of the investments that we're going to see coming out, the investment pledges that are going to be coming forward tomorrow, because these will help with regards to addressing the country's debt crisis. We heard last week Finance Minister Tito Mboweni speaking about how debt as a ratio to GDP is expected to rise to as much as 70% in the next 3 years rather. And she's basically said that these investments are crucial with regards to addressing this debt crisis. We also heard conversations during a panel discussion about the country's high unemployment levels as well as high inequality, and basically the sentiments were that if South Africa does not address these problems and if investment is not trying to make an impact in our society with regards to ensuring that people have employment and so on, we might see the same social unrest that we saw during the Arab Springs. But to speak to me more on that, we're joined by Elias Masilela, who is the chairman of the Impact Investment Movement. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Please tell us more about what government and business can do with regards to promoting impactful investments.
Thank you very much. Let me start off by saying that the targets that the president has set for the country or himself are quite heroic. And we think that's where we should be setting our sights as a country, because we have not been doing the right things that we're supposed to be doing since 1994. And that means there's a lot of work that needs to be done to mop up. And what the president is doing is actually an echoing of impact investing, where the president is saying, I need to rebuild the country. For me to be able to rebuild the country, I need private capital or capital from the private sector. And what impact investing is about, it's a movement that says the problems of society are too big to be dealt with by government alone. They need to be driven by, or the solutions need to be driven by the private sector. And what it then says is the private sector needs to bring in both its intellectual capital and financial capital to close the gaps that have been left by governments. You'll recall when the SDGs were unveiled in New York at the UN, the heads of state admitted that they had failed with the MDGs, and they don't want to fail again in working towards the SDGs. They then said, as part of SDG 16 and 17, they then said we need a very strong partnership with the private sector, which is going to make sure that we don't fail with the SDGs. And what that means is that the private sector will now take the lead. And governments need to be there to provide the right investment environment for those investments to bear the fruits they're supposed to bear. And we've been arguing through the National Development Plan that we need to build what we call or agree to what we call a social compact as South Africa. And a social compact is something that almost says the responsibilities of the country are mine as well. I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. And that is the psyche that we need to get ourselves to as a country.
And you mentioned something about the social unrest that we've seen in Chile as well as in the Arab Springs, and you saying that those kinds of situations, we could actually see a repeat of those in South Africa if we don't address the issues of inequality in the country. Please talk us through that.
Indeed, you will have noticed that the problem in Chile was actually triggered by something that is not supposed to create chaos to that extent. But what it showed us was that there was something underlying that problem. So the tariffs, transport tariffs, were not the only problem that they were faced with. So the growing inequality is what is actually driving what is happening in Chile. When the SDGs were unveiled, this is what the heads of state concluded. Inequality is the biggest risk for the global society. It's a risk on private capital. It's also a risk for the existence of governments in the way in which we know them. And if you want to manage those risks, you need to invest in a way that closes social and economic gaps in a society. And unfortunately, the Chilean experience is not unique. The inequality they are faced with is not only located in Chile. We have a similar problem in South Africa, if not worse. And what that means to us is that what we see in Chile is a problem waiting to happen in South Africa. And if we want to stave off the problem, avoid that occurring in this country, we need to invest differently going forward. We need to engage differently with the poor.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. There you have it, Arabile. That was Elias Masilela speaking to us on the crisis that is waiting to happen if we do not address the issue of inequality in the country. For now, Arabile, it's back to you in studio.
Mbalenhle Mthethwa, thank you so much for that. Of course, live in Sandton, then giving us perhaps a precursor, shall we say, to the official second South Africa Investment Conference, which indeed does kick off today, but formal proceedings will then happen, of course, tomorrow. We are expected to see quite a few pledges as well being put forward early tomorrow morning, with a gala dinner as well later on in the evening. Soweto becomes the prime spot for the investment conference as well as we go into Thursday. So it is indeed a full program for the President Cyril Ramaphosa, who has actually today launched the